Hello and welcome everybody to the Autism Summit. We're very fortunate to have Alison Wimmer with us today. She has a background in counseling and her degree is in counseling, and then she went on to do research in autism and initially focused on applied behavioral therapy. And after doing that, she developed her own integrative technique for treating kids in the autistic spectrum. And we're just really fortunate to have you with us tonight and happy you can be with us. And tell us a little about your background, how you got started, your interest in autism, and how you work with the kids.
Thank you so much for having me, Norm. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and help educate the families. I first started when I was little in school. I would hold hands with the kids with special needs, not really ever knowing what was different about them.
Is it in high school, you mean?
When I was little, you know, in high school, I was able to volunteer and took a class in development and was able to really kind of hands-on, work with these kids within my high school community. But I've always, in my entire school career, if you will, I've really been drawn to those kids. So I would go and sit with them and have lunch and help them study and pick up their books that fell out of their locker and pick them first on the playground and that kind of thing. But it wasn't until my youngest was about 1, that I started working hands-on specifically with kids with autism.
And how did that come about?
Well,
Because your children were not on the spectrum?
Oh, no, not at all. They did have varying issues. My oldest son is 27 now, and when he was 4, he had some really significant environmental allergies. You know, I couldn't take him to the grocery store without him just throwing a fit. And he was a very, very typical, very mild-mannered young man. But we would get close to the laundry aisle, and he would flip out every time. And, you know, I really couldn't pinpoint what was going on. We'd go swimming. We had a pool in our backyard, so we swam every day. And then he would take a shower afterwards, and we always did fluoride treatments and, you know, kind of came to find out that his world was poison to him. So I started, yes, he was very sensitive. So I started working with some professionals with my own children just for different things. My middle son got Lyme disease on a trip to Wisconsin when he was little, and my daughter was very, very typical. You know, by number 3, I pretty much had down what not to do and what to do, at least when it came to her. So, but my neighbor asked me to help her with her grandson, Willie, and just asked me to go meet him and said that she liked how I was with my kids and that she would like to have me work with Willie.
So you had a natural, intuitive approach, I'm guessing.
Perhaps. I really connected well with Willie. His mom was a radiologist and Dad was a banker. A very well-off family with really high hopes for their child. But at that point in Phoenix, their hands were really tied. There wasn't a lot there. There weren't schools specialized in autism, and there weren't even really special ed classrooms that were made for these kids to really succeed. They were more life skill, kind of low functioning approach to these kids.
So that got you started working with the kids, and
yes.
And what techniques did you use initially, and how has that evolved? And
well, back then, the big deal was the applied behavior analysis, the low-VAS treatment. It was tried and true. They figured from the 1950s, and enough research had been done, and they really felt that the repetition, you know, ABA therapy, 10 trials, do this, no, do this, just really more memorization, and in my mind, really not practical for the child to function. I mean, they certainly could function, but I guess they couldn't thrive from my perspective in that environment. So I did a lot of work, but I also made sure I educated myself. And I went to California and I took assessment classes, for different therapies, and went up to Canada and studied there, would pretty much volunteer myself to a situation that I felt would teach me something. So I wouldn't, if there was a family meeting with a doctor, I would volunteer to go for free to that doctor's appointment to really learn from that doctor what they were doing with the child. And so I became, I think, pretty well versed in the new treatments and the treatments that were available, at least in our area.
And those type of treatments were?
Mostly just like behavioral, language, again, the applied behavior analysis, and then a little bit of biomedical stuff. There was a treatment in the late 90s called secretin, and I know there's different ways to pronounce that, but basically a child had, I think it might have been a lower endoscopy or something like that, and the secretin was given as part of that process, and all of a sudden, once he came out, he could speak, and he had never spoken. So even people on my caseload were mortgaging their houses to get this secretin. It was actually quite a chaotic time.
We were hoping it might be a lasting treatment, but that didn't pan out. So.
Yeah. So I worked with the Southwest Autism Research Center. I volunteered there a lot, and I was able to do some of the secretin infusions. I mean, I didn't physically do them. I'm not a nurse, but I would be there holding the child, calming the parent, whatever. I was in the room with the children as they were being infused. Okay. And, just different things as far as the biomedical, but absolutely nothing like there is available now as far as the knowledge and treatment of these kids.
And so how has that evolved? How would you assess a child now?
So I do things so differently. Kids with autism, I'm very intrigued by them. I mean, their brains, to me, I feel like I get them. You can look at a child with autism and kind of see what they're thinking, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, I'm looking at them and saying, where are their eyes darting to? What is their posture like? There's people who read people and they say, well, if you're looking over your left shoulder, you're more warm and welcoming, and if you're looking over your right shoulder, you're forceful and unkind. There's people that study all of those things. So when I look at a child with autism, I'm studying to see, what is their perspective on this situation, and I try really hard to get inside of their eyes and get behind their hands and watch what sounds or things are indicating an issue for them. And then I have to really prove to the child that I get them. The parents are paying me, but it's the child that has to trust me. When it comes to autism, I can't sit a child down and say, I can help you unless they really believe that I can.
So you let them approach you when they're ready?
I do. I don't always, I will sit down with the child and teach them something generally pretty quick, or turn off a light that's bothering them, or turn off the air conditioner if it's too loud, or shut a blind, or take away something that smells bad to them, or whatever I can determine from kind of getting behind their eyes and ears and feeling. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Again, that's that. Are we talking about the art of medicine, or how you can encompass a child fully? And it's been shown that kids on the spectrum actually have higher intelligence.
They're very intelligent.
Yeah, and unfortunately, their processing is messed up, but that's where you can help, right?
Right. Their sensory system, they get overloaded so quickly. Just a barking dog down the street can throw a child into a complete messed up entire rest of their day because they just can't settle back in. I had a little boy that his brother would come home from school and he would sit at his desk and he would kind of roll his desk back and forth. And this little boy was probably in 9th grade, and the little child that I worked with was 6. And so he did great all day long, but once his older brother came home from school and he would do his homework and rock that chair over that wood floor, he didn't do well anymore. And so I found that that was a good time to take him out on a walk, take him away from that situation, by identifying what it was that made it bad. And how I knew it was bad for him was I whispered in his ear and I said, "Garrison, do you hear your brother's chair?" And he went like, "You heard it too?" He didn't say that, but I could see that he was like, wow, she knows what's bothering me. So that was a way for him to kind of believe in me. And that's the kind of stuff that I think is really important. There's a lot of people who can say, get this book, it'll help you to fix your child. And, in reality, I had a caseload of 200 kids. And I didn't see them all the time, but I was consulting for all of these families. And there was not one child that was anywhere close to the child next to them. They're just all so different, and the families are so different, and the dynamic of the family is so different. So
you had the ability to analyze it.
Yes.
Partly with your training, I think, partly intuitive, partly the art.
Yes.
And then be able to work with the kids. And what type of, how would you help with their sensory overload and their processing?
I did a ton of stuff with their sensory. The self-stimulation, the kids who start to stim and those endorphins are released and they need to stim more, that was probably the hardest thing to target. And really the hardest part of it was having the parents kind of buy into that, because when their child was stimming, they were happy. And they rarely saw their child be happy, or they just wanted to see him be happy, or whatever their reason was for allowing him or her to stim. And so telling them to stop being happy was basically what I had to do. But once I got the child to a point where the stimming, which was up here, very severe when I came into the home, down, to like their outside play and their interaction with the environment is down here. And once I got them to interact more and the stimming kind of came to here, I really had won the battle, because the child was now so intrigued with their environment that the stimming wasn't as exciting to them anymore. If they got sick, they had a toothache, something happened, mom was stressed.
And was it different for each kid, how you would help them?
Oh, absolutely.
So it's...
Yes. If you think about sensory overload, your senses, so your eyes and your ears and your touch and your taste, and, so yes, every child is different, just like you and I are both different. But the plan was always the same. I would go in and see where are they stressed. Even checking things like heart rate. Again, not like a nurse, but just holding on to their wrists and, kind of watching their face flush, or their posturing, or, their happiness, their relaxed,
So you could sense the state the kid was in.
Yeah. And then I could kind of, it's kind of like if you started to cross your arms and I would wonder, were you cold? To me it's all just logic, right?
Mm-hmm.
If they can't function in their environment because the sensory system is off and things aren't firing properly, you need to, I believe, calm down those sensory overload issues. Go for a walk when brother is pushing the chair. Make a way so that chair doesn't bother him. But in reality, my perception has always been to accommodate the child and not accommodate his environment. So I might say to Billy, when you hear that, this is what you do. Because we can't stop him from doing what he's doing, but we can stop what's happening to you, So really changing the environment to fit the child instead of expecting the whole world to change for that child. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. So you would work on many levels, like in a school setting or in the family setting, and so in terms of what things you found helpful, specific techniques, you've mentioned a few, and What kind of,
So, you know, in the field of neurodevelopment, which is kind of where I ended up evolving to
and
after
how is
the
neurodevelopment
ABA.
different than ABA?
Well, ABA is very repetitive. So it's, you know, match these two things. It's put this in here, drive this, like just giving commands, okay? It's just an example of ABA. And so you would do 10 trials of trying to get this child to do that thing, and you would mark them on those things. So the child is basically, if they get it right the first time, they still have to do it 9 more times, because that's how we get the data, right? So I didn't really do it that way. And I decided that the child needed to process the information, because you and I, we walk around and we process information. We don't have really anything memorized. You know, maybe where our clothes are in our drawers, or, you know, where our car keys are, or that kind of thing. We have those things memorized. We're used to those things. But in an odd environment, we really don't have that memorization. You know, we don't know that environment. So I look at these kids and I say, you know, how can he process this? If I tell him this, so for example, if I said, Norm, clap your hands and stomp your feet. Okay? A child in ABA treatment would have learned that sequence. I would have taught him first to clap his hands, and then I would have taught him to clap his hands, or I would have taught him to stomp his feet, and then put both together. But in neurodevelopment, I'm going to teach him to process 2 pieces of information, but they're not always going to be a memorized same situation. Okay, so he really has to tune in, and he has to know and listen to what I'm talking about. Right. Working on behaviors, you know, not letting him stim, showing him things other than stimming. I guess, you know, neurodevelopment, you're looking at diet, health, you know, supplementation. I mean, I'm not doing anything with those things, but I'm directing them to people who
or other practitioners
I believe can do that properly. I look at speech and movement and everything.
And you work with the schools?
Yes.
That's, I assume, could be a big part.
It is a big part. And you know, in the autism population, there was a lot of lawsuits and things that kind of happened early on, especially in the 90s, in the late 90s, in Phoenix for sure, because that's where I was.
Within the classroom setting, or
like the teachers were afraid to have parents bring a professional in, and they were, you know, suing them and saying that they had to pay for their children to go to school elsewhere because they couldn't accommodate them. So there was a huge rift when it came to people like myself going into the classroom. It was really, really hard to get that acceptance. But in reality, my outlook was, I work for Jimmy. Jimmy's in your class. Jimmy's really hard for you. I'm really good at Jimmy. Let me tell you how Jimmy's going to do better in this classroom.
Okay.
And that approach helped a lot.
Right. And I'm thinking, or sure, that once the teachers could see your interest was the child, then you got probably more buy-in and cooperation.
Yes, yes. It took a lot of work. But it was so worth it, because the kids are in school for 6 or 8 hours a day, and if the teacher doesn't have a good feel for that child, the future of that child is not good.
So I know, working with families, and one of the issues is always potty training.
Yeah, that's a biggie.
It can be challenging,
right,
for a lot of reasons, the gut issues or the sensory issues. So how's that something you would approach?
It's a biggie. It's a biggie. I mean, in Phoenix particularly, I was called the potty training queen. I mean, I wear that hat with a lot of pride. It's
well, if you're a family, the kid's not potty trained, that's big deal.
I had a system that I actually used with my own kids. And so I never really felt like I was that much of a genius. But when it came to these kids, the families were really excited to have me come on board. So generally, you're looking at a typical child at, 2-ish. They're learning to potty. They're interested in potty, but sometimes these kids have been in diapers or pull-ups or just messing in their pants at, the age of 6. And by then they've become really good at not doing it right. And so it's even harder at that stage to teach the child. And the parents are usually up in arms, and bowels at 6 are a lot harder to clean than the diaper of a 2-year-old, at least for me. So I was always excited when I worked with the families to get the child potty trained. So, some of the methods I used that I thought were really, really beneficial were kind of looking at what I called an intake-outtake. I'm talking about all this in past tense. I mean, these are still things that I use, but I'm talking about in Phoenix, when I was primarily working with these kids with autism. So I would do an intake-outtake journal. So we would look at everything that went in and kind of when it came out. Okay. So, are they waking up dry? Are they wet at 11:30? Do they wet right after they go to sleep? When are they having bowel movements and that kind of thing? So once we got a 5-day intake-outtake journal, then I kind of knew when was a good time to really do the potty training. And so sometimes, Norm, it's funny because everybody always told me write a book. Well, I can't write a book because every situation is different. So in general, I would tell moms, this is going to be potty day. So no gym, no being a bus driver to school, no making food, no phone calls, no dog walking. You are on potty training today. And so we would go in. The child would, if it was a boy, I like to have him stripped because it was visually obvious, if that's okay to say, when they were having to go pee. So we would go into the bathroom. The child would be obviously ready to go pee. We would sit the child on the potty and just basically tell them to go pee. Kind of like we would say, put your seatbelts on, or don't forget your backpack. Like, just go pee. So child would sit there and they would scream and say, I don't want to go pee, or act like they don't want to go pee. But basically just, getting them to stay. And how do you get them to stay? It can be really difficult. I'm not a believer in reading books or watching videos or singing songs unless they're about pee. So I made up pee songs and come on out, little pee-pee, and I can see you're in there, and so we would, get the child to kind of buy into that, all right? And if we got some pee, then we would have the child get off of the toilet and do everything for them. So the only thing they were responsible for was peeing. So no flushing, no wiping, no pulling up clothes, no washing hands. That was all us. So again, kind of breaking down those steps. And not have a party, not make a big deal, don't take pictures, don't call grandma. You are supposed to pee because that's what we do. We pee. And it actually was really successful for the most part. There were some times when the child would just fuss and fret and, I'm not going to pee. But truly, I didn't let them up until they did. And once they understood that, they peed right when they sat down, because otherwise it was going to be super boring. And I was just going to sit there in their face, and that's what we were going to do. So I was very determined with these very determined little kids. And
they picked that up.
It paid off.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of other methods to do, but the bottom line is consistency and, taking it one step at a time. So, trying to get a child to dress. Don't expect them to get the pants out of the drawer and sit down on the bed and put each foot into the pants and stand up and pull them up over their bum and get them buckled and all of that. Start at the top of the thigh and have them do that last step.
Okay. So then you
really
were synthesizing. That's somewhat the ABA approach then. So you really synthesized.
Backwards chaining is kind of what I called it. So, just I think looking at everything in little segments instead of, if the whole picture is you want the child to be able to dress themselves, look at it in incremental little steps and then screw it up, hide the shoes, don't have any socks in the drawer, change things up so that everything is more normal, more typical. Things aren't always as they should be. So.
Well, I can see, as you mentioned earlier, you're just a natural at being able to.
You're very sweet. I love what I do.
And I know, along, and you touched a little bit before, maybe you could say a few more words about stimming, because that's another challenge for families or concern.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. It is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to kiddos with autism or on the autism spectrum. Everyone stims, but stimming is detrimental in these kids. And, as a baby we stim, and eventually we grow into our environment and our environment is stimulating to us. So we don't really have to entertain ourselves. We're kind of at that point where I mentioned before, where our environment is more important to us than our stimming. When it comes to kids with autism, there's a ton of stims that I see that parents don't see. And it's important to point them out. Your typical flapping or shaking, or, I've got a little guy down in Texas that, he takes little breaths, and that, anything that looks weird, if you will, is generally a stim. If you hear yourself saying, he always, blah, 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 or whenever he, blah, blah, blah. Anything that is repetitive, that it's difficult to get the child out of, if they get angry, if you stop them from doing it, it's generally a stim. And they can be things like drinking from a water bottle and watching the bubbles as they take sips and watching the bubbles go back up into the water bottle.
I used to do that.
Did you? Walking past a mirror and kind of looking at it through the side of their eyes, or, hotels. I used to do evaluations in hotels. The worst, because all of that ugly carpet, no offense to whoever builds hotels, but they would stim on those lines in that patterned carpet, and basically come up for the evaluation and look like they're on drugs. And it was frustrating to the parents because they were paying good money for an evaluation, and now their child is, forgive me, but stoned.
Could be the toxic fumes in the carpet.
It could be anything. It could be the person who just bleached out the elevator. It could be anything. And so, when we look at these sensitive kids and we look at these STEMI kids, if that's all they can focus on, if that's all they can handle, how do we expect them to perceive their world like you and I do?
Now, I assume when you go into a home, do you teach the parents things how to work with the kids?
Absolutely.
I know you do a lot of traveling, and we'll have your website information for any families who might be interested. But how often do you come back and you teach parents to?
Yeah, so everybody's different, and I know I keep saying that, but it's very true. Some homes, I talk to the families once a week. Sometimes I don't talk to them for 3 months. Sometimes I consult with them at the beginning of a new school year. But as a general practice, I am in the home or they're coming to see me every 3 months. Okay. I do a full assessment. I look at every aspect of that child as if I had never seen them before. And then I write a program specific to what they need to do, or whatever the parents think the issues are, whatever I perceive the issues to be.
And do the parents have assignments or things they need to do with the child?
Yep. So analyzing really what they're capable of, what their life can handle, other children, other obligations. Do they work? Is a child homeschooled or, at school, or do they have a nanny or babysitters or siblings, or, what is a load for the parents? Those are all really important things, because we as professionals cannot expect that they can stop their entire life with every other aspect to work with this child.
Right.
I want them to be successful because, again, I work for the child, truly, not the family, not the parents. I do work for the family as a whole, but the child is my ultimate
why you're there.
focus.
And that's why you're hired to do that.
And looking at that, treating the parent and any other individuals, even the siblings, sometimes the other kids in the family, they don't really know how to interact. I think that having a child with special needs is a blessing, but I think it's really hard. I think it can bring the family unit together. I have had special situations in my own life, and you can either look at them as horrible or you can look at them as beneficial. I have become very compassionate to people with special needs because of my own experience, my own story.
Do you feel comfortable sharing some of that in your own life?
So, when I was a young mom of 3 kids, at the age of 32, I had a stroke. And I had a husband who was not very active in our family, a very, very good man, but worked at night and slept during the day. And so when I had this stroke, I drove myself to the hospital, made sure that the children were taken care of. I actually stroked again in triage and spent the next week and a half in ICU and telemetry. They studied everything. We were in Phoenix, so Barrows Neurological Institute. I became a lab rat for them. They swore to me that I had epilepsy, that I had had a seizure, so they put me on Tegretol. Talk about stoned. I was like this one day for 7.5 hours. I was watching my ceiling fan. How do I know that? Because I was in the exact same position when my friend came to drop off the kids, and I couldn't move my legs because I had been in the same position for so long. It was horrible. I couldn't drive because I had had a seizure. So I spent a lot of time telling them that I didn't have a seizure and that I felt that I had a stroke, which to me was very obvious. One arm was longer, I was drooling, my tongue was hanging out. People would say, "You're drunk at 10 in the morning. I'm not drunk, my tongue doesn't work anymore. So eventually they started to listen, and they gave me some scans and actually saw the stroke. But it wasn't seen, of course, right in the hospital, nor was it seen, 7 weeks later. It took quite a while for it to show up. That was in April. In September, I had a heart attack.
Wow.
And
you were 32?
I was 32,
Wow.
almost 33, and so I went to the cardiologist, and he prescribed medication for me that was really meant for people over the age of 60 or over 400 pounds. The dosage was not matching me. So I really struggled for quite a while with the medication. I was in really good shape. I was exercising. My blood pressure was really high, but when I exercised, my vessels would open and my blood pressure would go down. So I was exercising ridiculous amounts of time every day to make myself feel better. That's what my body did, not knowing what was truly going on with me. So finally got that straightened out and went to work in neurodevelopment, kind of full on, and it really helped me to say, you can beat this, you can beat anything, and people were really amazed at my perseverance, I guess. Fast forward to...
But you had to learn how to really help yourself.
Oh, I did.
Which I think helped you help others.
Oh, yes. I did it, and like I said, my husband was not really hands-on. So I ended up, unfortunately or fortunately, we're very good friends now, but divorcing him and going back to school, getting my degree in social work, because I felt that the families had issues and were asking me questions that I couldn't answer. Like, what do I do when my husband does this? Well, I'm here to work with Billy. I don't know that answer. And so I went in and studied social work, counseling, family therapy. I did really well. I loved it. And put myself through school and finally moved my kids to Utah. Got out of the city. It was crazy. I was healthy. And again, fast forward. In 2009, early in 2009, the doctors told me that they thought that I had fluid in my ears. And so they were going to put some tubes in to kind of relieve the fluid. I was having some problems with my hearing and balance and things like that. And so they put the tubes in, but I don't like anesthesia. So I laid in the office and you put them in, and the needle actually hurt more than putting the tube in itself. And a couple of days later I said, "Sir, I went back into the office and I said, this one it's itchy. This one feels like it's not in right. Kind of like if you have a cap on your tooth and they didn't click it in properly, and it just didn't feel right." And he said, "Well, if you want, I'll take it out. Like, quit being a baby," basically. And I felt really, really bad. I left that tube in, and in October of that year, I ended up with a severe infection. I had MRSA.
From the tube?
We don't know. So I was rushed to Cedars-Sinai. It was a time when they had the swine flu. And so they said that I had to go in through a back door because I was so infected. And they read me my last rites. I was so toxic, the anesthesiologist refused my case. They did a 9-hour procedure and did a mastoidectomy. And I went back to a friend's house that I was staying at to recuperate. It took a while. About 3 weeks after that surgery, I went back into the doctor in Long Beach, and I told them that I felt that I was getting sick again. I could tell that I was having neurological change. My vision and everything kind of was going back to how it was 3 weeks prior to, that time. And he said that I had just had a major operation and it would take a year or two for me to get better, and that I just needed to go home and be comfortable and, work my way back up to health. So I did, but I didn't believe him. I went home that November and told, because I was living in California part-time with my daughter while she was doing some work there. So I went back to Utah and I told my doctor that I didn't feel right and I wanted an MRI. And he gave me one, and I actually had the infection. The MRSA was back in my brain, but not in the lining of my brain, but it actually kind of gone into my brain. So they did a second procedure. And unfortunately, again, it came back, which they said they had never seen. So they took out my temporal bone. In a lot of places, I have holes here. They told me that I needed to wear a helmet for the rest of my life. And they cut my balance nerve and my taste nerve. They didn't sever them completely, but they were nipped in the procedure because of kind of how they had to get up there. There was a huge, I call it a snot ball. It wasn't truly a snot ball, but that's what I call it, on the front of my brain, which they had to cut out. So I again had to go in and work to get my taste back because everything tasted like metal. I still to this day cannot stand up and close my eyes without falling. If it's dark out, I can't tell where I'm, my balance is off. I cannot climb stairs in the dark. But I do have my taste back. So spinning and hula hooping in the dark and doing all these kinds of things that I just come up with and create, I think have really helped me. I'm still not to the point where I'll go to the top of the mountain and ski down without some support, like, you know, a couple of ski patrollers or my husband or somebody right
Yeah.
with me, but I'm getting there. And, you know, I believe that everything that I have been through has truly helped me to get behind the eyes of that child.
Well, thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
I do understand.
Thank you.
Well, again, we'll have your information. Families want to learn more about you. And thanks so much again for being here, and really appreciate your time, and very best wishes.
Thank you, Norm.
Keep helping the kids.
I love what you're doing. Thank you for doing this.